Hello, I'm Eric Guido with Vinous Media, and welcome to my kitchen. Tonight's a very special night because tonight is my wife's birthday, and we have a tradition in this family that when it's your birthday, you get to choose whatever you want to have for dinner that night, and I'll make it. Tonight, we're making one of my signature dishes and one of my wife's favorites, asparagus risotto. So, risotto is an interesting thing because a lot of people are really afraid to attempt to make risotto. But the reality is it's actually quite simple. And what it really comes down to is having patience. Also, preparation is key. As you can see, I've already put together all of my ingredients. In this case, we have 5 cups of chicken stock, half cup of white wine, a bunch of asparagus. You'll notice I separated the tips because everyone loves to have the tips at the top of their risotto. The recipe calls for a quarter cup of slivered almonds, but I went for a full half cup because this is a favorite of my kids when I toast them up with a little butter and salt. Cup and a half of arborio rice, which is the rice you should be making a risotto such as this with. Half a cup of Parmesan Reggiano, and 1 full shallot. If you're not familiar with shallots, it's basically something that is somewhere between garlic and onion. Works great with risotto because it doesn't add too much flavor from the onion side of things, but adds a nice little bit of sweetness. So, we're going to start. First things first is we're going to get our stock going. It's important that your stock is warmed, not boiling, because throughout the process you're going to be adding this into the risotto. And what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to be pouring boiling stock into a simmering risotto. So that's starting its warming process. I already have a low flame underneath this pot where the risotto is going to be cooked. I'm going to bring that up to a medium flame. So don't be scared by the fact that this pot doesn't look like the average pot in somebody's arsenal. The reality is you can use any heavy gauge stainless steel pot to make risotto. I definitely like them to have something of a bowl shape because of the stirring process that's involved. But in this case, I came to this pot a while back. It's ceramic, and it really holds the heat as well as evenly distributes it. So I happen to fall in love with this pot. But that doesn't mean you have to use anything special to make a risotto. The fact is you can make a small risotto in a pot such as this, or the one that I just showed you. So, we're going to start. First by throwing some sweet butter, unsalted butter, into this pan and letting it melt and also cook off some of the water that's in the butter itself. So each risotto, and this is something to keep in mind to really bend your brain around how easy it is. Most risotto can be built off of one recipe, and that would be a Risotto Bianco. So with these ingredients here, if you were to remove the asparagus and you were to remove the almonds, we would have all the ingredients we need here for Risotto Bianco. Another thing to keep in mind about risotto is that it's really great for the kids. A Risotto Bianco, I introduced my kids to at a very young age, basically calling it like an Italian macaroni and cheese. And once they tasted it, there was no going back. In fact, sometimes on their birthdays, they'll ask for risotto as well. So now our butter is melted in the pot, and we're about to start our process of cooking. We're going to add the shallots to the pot and allow them to sweat. At this point, I'll also add a little bit of salt and stir. Now you're not looking to sear these shallots. You're not looking to crisp them. You're not looking for them to brown. You just want to sweat them. You want to open up their flavors and their aromatics. We're going to let that go for a minute. At this time, I'm also going to start my pot for my toasted almonds because throughout this recipe, you can do this at the beginning or you can do it at the end, but I prefer to reserve the end for more critical decision making on tasting the risotto, seasoning the risotto, making sure it's the right consistency. So for the almonds, we're going to take another thing of butter, We're going to move our shallots around a little bit. Make sure they're not overcooking in one place more than the other. And this process is only going to take about 1 or 2 minutes. They smell incredible. Now we're going to start with our rice. Spoon in hand, ready to stir. We're going to add in our rice. All this time, we're doing this over a medium flame, and we're going to stir. The most important thing about a risotto, everyone, is stirring. A big mistake that a lot of people make is they walk away from their risotto, and it'll either burn or it'll get too dry. The sad thing is that in many restaurants, a risotto is made by cheating, where they will cook the rice to a certain level and then immediately pull it from the stove, large batches, mind you, and then when a customer orders their risotto, they'll simply take a portion of the pre-cooked rice, toss it into a pot, and finish it. Any risotto that's being made like that is simply not going to have the same level of quality as one that is made at the moment. And so one tip is if you go to a restaurant and you order the risotto and they say, well, please everyone keep in mind the risotto is going to take 25 to 30 minutes to cook, then you know you're in a good place. Because then you know you're in a place that is cooking that risotto right there as soon as you ordered it. So at this point we're just kind of toasting up the rice a little bit, and when I say toast I don't mean trying to get any color on here, I mean just trying to get a little bit of a toasty aroma coming up out from the rice. And let's talk about the wine really quick. Because I'm going to tell you about a couple wines and I'm going to think about pairing for this a little bit. But it's going to be white wine for the actual risotto itself that you're going to add. But don't have a problem with adding the white wine you also happen to be drinking at the table. You know, one thing that I learned when I was in culinary school is you shouldn't ever add a wine to your food that you wouldn't be willing to drink. And what better way to complement your wine pairing than to add a wine that you're actually going to be drinking with your food. So now this risotto is nice and toasted. If you take a look, we're not talking about color here. What I'm actually going by is a smell that I'm getting from the risotto. You can actually smell a little bit of toastiness from it. And we go in with the wine. The stirring process continues. And we're basically going to allow this wine to reduce just to the point that we no longer have liquid in the trails that are made by the spoon. Now if we also want to look down really quick, we're now going to add our almond slivers to our butter mixture. Now this is actually a very sensitive process. We're going to season them. Now when I say sensitive, it's because these almonds can go from toasting to burning very quick. We're going to have our tray ready. Notice I'm still stirring the risotto. Okay, so now we see, then we put the spoon through, we make a trail, but we have no liquid. Now we know it's time to add some stock. So I add my first ladleful, and I stir. Now is also the time that I set my timer. Now I have found risotto cooked over medium heat, you can usually go by about 16 minutes until you need to start actually tasting it to get a feel for if it's done yet or not. You want to keep these almonds moving around the pan as well. My kids actually think it's very funny because this spoon is what I refer to as my risotto spoon. I only use this spoon to cook risotto and for all things to make pancake batter for them. And the reason for that is that I don't want to take the chance of using a spoon that may have absorbed the flavors or the aromas of another food. You know what I mean? You all have that spoon in your kitchen, right? You don't want to be mixing that with your risotto. So if we come back to the risotto now, as I'm stirring, we are now getting back to the point where that when I make lines, it doesn't fill with liquid. Instead, it just fills with the rice. And you can also see that already this rice is starting to let proteins out that are starting to form the sauce that will pull the whole risotto together. So here we go. We're going to go for another ladle full of stock. Now take a look at our almonds. They're almost ready. You can see that they're toasting, not burning. And also keep in mind that these are going to continue to cook in the pan and when we take them out off the heat. Now, if you're wondering about any of their pots in the stove here, this is the man behind the curtain you should ignore, because this is the fact that my kids need to have a vegetable with their risotto, and they just don't happen to want asparagus risotto. So they're having white risotto tonight with a little bit of a steamed vegetable. This pan is going to be for our asparagus. Because one of the most important things you learn about cooking, or at least that I've learned about cooking, is that everything should be done separately and seasoned separately so that the flavors remain distinguished in the final dish. So these almonds are almost ready, and I must say, I really wish that you could smell them, because it's intoxicating smelling these almonds roasting right now. And it's absolutely there's no doubt why I make the extra when you smell what the pan smells like right now. Okay, adding a little bit of stock. And these almonds are just about ready to come out. They are perfect. Now, when I say you gotta keep on stirring, I don't mean that you have to be an absolute maniac and stir the exact 16 minutes, but it is important that you keep stirring. And I know there are plenty of professionals that'll tell you that this isn't important, but it's the way I was taught, and I have to say, it has never failed me. So, no reason to change. Okay, so I'm going to keep stirring this risotto and using the process that I showed, where I will add stock each time I get to that point that the trails I create in the pan don't have any liquid coming into them before it has the rice mixture coming in. And then we're going to come back when I'm almost done, and I'm going to show you how we're going to finish this dish. Okay, so here we are. We have 3 minutes, now 2 minutes left. Reality is, I don't know if you noticed, the only time I seasoned this is when I first put in the shallots. Again, this is how I was taught in culinary school. This is the first time I actually add any salt to the mix. I'm going to add a little more stock. As you can see, still stirring. What we're also going to do is we are now going to prepare our asparagus. In my oven, I had the toasted almonds just staying warm. I'll go over here for our plating. So remember what I said about the timer. This is really just a guide. Once that timer gets to be about 1 minute left, that's going to be the first time I taste the risotto. And what I'm looking for is that mystical word that we all use when cooking pasta and risotto. I'm looking for al dente. Well, al dente basically means the rice still has a little bit of a crunch. We don't want people to have to feel the kernels crunching beneath their teeth, but what you want to have is that little bit of grittiness. It provides like a tactile feel, especially a dish like this where it's so rich in textures. That grittiness adds a lot of just extra sensory pleasure. That's the best way to say it. Okay, so 30 seconds, first taste. And we are nearly there. In fact, I am going to now turn off the heat on this risotto. I'm going to add my asparagus to this pot and start cooking. A little bit of salt. still stirring my risotto. As I mentioned about this pot, your risotto is still cooking. There is still residual heat here. And you'd have the same effect from having a larger gauge cast iron, not cast iron, but stainless steel as well. Okay. I'm done stirring. The heat's off of my risotto. I'm now going to put a cover on. I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes to let it rest. A little pepper to our asparagus. Notice I haven't started the tips yet. And now a little bit of stock. There's no magic here, we're just shallow poaching these. You don't want them to be too overcooked, and you also don't want to take away the flavor of the actual asparagus itself. When someone bites into a piece of asparagus in the risotto, you want them to taste asparagus. So I'm going to move these to the side, and now take care of the tips. All this time the risotto is just resting. Okay, so I'm searing my asparagus tips. Our risotto is resting, and now we're going to talk very quickly about the wine. Pairing wine with asparagus can be, well, many people believe it's difficult. Reality is, if I had to pair wine with just a plate of asparagus, I might be worried. But when it comes to risotto, it really opens up the boundaries of what you can pair with this dish. First, I would go with something high acidity, something fresh. A classic pairing is Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio has a good amount of acidity, it's a nice, crisp wine. But for me, I also like to have something that's going to bring some extra robust flavors to the mix. And I'm a huge fan of going with a young, fresh Fiano. Fiano from South of Campania. This is done all in stainless steel, has great zesty acidity. Another classic pairing would be to go to Gamay, which I don't have. Think Beaujolais. However, what I do have is a nice Spanish red from Bierzo, Pétalos. This is made with Mencia grape and actually has around 10% of white grapes added into the mix. Now, that might sound odd to the average person, but the reality is what it does for it is it adds this wonderful, exotic, floral, zesty appeal to this wine. If you don't have Gamay, you should definitely seek this out. And it's also something that you can find around. Okay, we are basically ready to finish this risotto. Taking the cover off. And we're going to give it a stir. And this is exactly what I want to see. We are going to add our last tablespoon of butter, and we're going to add cheese. Not all, but most. We're going to save that remaining cheese to sprinkle over the top. We stir this in. We're going to give one more taste for seasoning. Notice the clean spoon. Just needs a tiny bit of salt. And a crack of pepper. And at this time, we have our white risotto. Now, since the kids want white risotto, we're going to plate theirs first. Now keep in mind, this is rich stuff. You don't need to go crazy here. No one's going to eat a heaping bowl of Risotto Bianco. well, I shouldn't say no one, but the average person is not going to eat a heaping bowl of Risotto Bianco. And you're also going to notice that for the kids, not only am I going to top this with some of those roasted almonds we talked about, but I'm also going to give them a generous helping of cheese. Now back to my wife's asparagus risotto. We're going to add in our asparagus. We honestly didn't need it all. I'm going to also add some of the liquid from the asparagus in here, simply because the longer this risotto sits on the stovetop, as you can see there's still steam coming, this rice is still cooking. Okay. And by the way, if you have leftovers, do not fear. Risotto warms up beautifully, and for those who are a little adventurous, if you let it cool and you roll it into balls and then you coat it in flour and you fry it, you have an amazing snack that you will fall in love with and be in love with for the rest of your life. And we have the finishing ingredients. We have the asparagus tips, because everybody likes to see the tips on top. Hit it with a little cheese now. Hit it with the toasted almonds. If you have a nice fresh olive oil, you could drizzle it on top, especially for a risotto like this, a nice fresh olive oil, which I just happen to have. Voila. My wife's birthday asparagus risotto. Well guys, thank you for joining me. I really hope that I can do this again. I had a great time. I've got lots of recipes. I'm always cooking for my family, and I'm happy to share them. So from me and from Vinous, thank you for joining us, and good night.